think I want people to feel a bit uneasy when they look at the paintings. I want them to not be exactly sure what to feel. I think that's the end goal, is to create an image that you're looking at and you can't really place yourself. What do you want to feel about it? Should I be really not liking this? Should I be judging this? Should I be feeling emotional about it? And so I think in bringing all of this together, you create a lot of possible readings and narratives. So what I try to do when I'm painting is I'm creating the compositions is I'm not trying to set one narrative for people to follow. I'm not trying to pass along a specific reading. I'm trying to sort of feeding the viewer things to reflect on and see what they can grab in the painting. And I think that's what, for me, makes it interesting, is the fact that it's sort of a layering of information, a layering of possible meanings, and everyone has to sort of decide where they want to place themselves in the middle of it all. My name is Afonso Rocha. I'm a Portuguese painter based in London, and I'm here at the Jackson studio to talk a bit about my practice. I try to paint either with silence or I listen to a lot of music. People tend to make a bit of fun of me because I listen to opera only, almost. When I was young, my parents had these recorded operas on DVD, and I used to watch them on loop. My parents are both art teachers, and so I think growing up, both me and my brothers, just around the house, painting and drawing was just sort of an everyday thing. I think the decision just made itself, and I decided to go into arts. At the time, my dad was going with his students to Madrid in a field trip, and I remember he coming back and bringing a couple of art catalogs. I remember one of them was a Lucian Freud book, and he was showing the book to a couple of the members in my family, and I remember going through it, and there was something in the pictures, in the depiction of people and using paint to do something like that really fostered this interest in painting for me. And so when the moment came after high school to go to university, I decided to go to the fine arts school, which at the moment, even though today feels like nothing, was quite a big decision because I had to get on the tube by myself and go to another side of town, to a place I absolutely didn't know. And it was quite outside my comfort zone at the time. So then I went to study to the Porto Faculty of Fine Arts, and the teaching there was quite academic. We had a lot of drawing, but that ended up giving me tools which are fundamental in my practice today. I felt from day one, we had a bit of freedom to, even though we were just doing a self-portrait, we could do it in our way. And so even though we were just all doing the same exercises, we got to do it the way we wanted and put a bit of ourselves in what we were painting. That sort of created a really strong relationship to art history and to painters from the past, which became something fundamental in my work. The hard part was to drift away from that and to not be dependent on the styles of painters from the past I like. And I think I had sort of a driving force, instinctive set of subjects I was interested in, and I had to separate what I really cared about and what was just the power of influence from art history. I think it's quite predictable, but the artists I admire the most, Portuguese artists, it's Paulo Rego, no doubt there. So I think Paulo Rego was really bold in approaching really uneasy subjects and really personal subjects. I think it took her I think it was the show at Serpentine, when she was like 50 something. This was 1988, I think. And that was like the first big move. And after that, she sort of exploded and became super internationally recognized. But most of her life really wasn't like that. And this is not to fantasize with the idea of the poor painter that goes through a lot and never gets recognized. It's just, I think, she never really cared about that. She just kept going and painting, and she always kept very unpretentious. And I think that's quite admirable. And then in the third year of my BA, I went to do an exchange program in the Beaux-Arts in Paris. A lot of people like Degas and other amazing painters study there. And at the same time, it was a huge city compared to where I was living in Porto. And I was just baffled all the time. I remember I was painting the sky and I was like, I don't know how to paint the sky. And then I would go to d'Orsay and I was looking at, say, a Monet or something, and I was, okay, this is how you paint the sky. And then I would travel back to school, which was like 10 minutes, and finish the sky. And I think it was sort of opened my horizons a lot, made me realize the world was much bigger than I thought it was. One of the funny things is that I was terrible at drawing human figure. In Paris, they have these classes called morphology. So it's a huge room, sort of like a theater. There's these huge chalkboards. We would have 3 models posing at the same time. We would pick one of them. And so it was like we had, say, 5 minutes to depict the pose. After the 5 minutes, the tutor would say, okay, that's it. And you would just erase it all from top to bottom and start again. I feel like when it was 2 minutes or 5 minutes, that was really okay. But when you spent 30 minutes or 40 minutes doing a huge drawing, you don't really want to erase it. But I think that sort of took the pressure off, because I didn't have to show what I had done. It was really freeing, and I think that really changed the way I perceived drawing human figure. And yeah, I think Paris changed my practice quite a lot. So what happened then was COVID happened, and I was in my peak, loving Paris and sort of going to museums all the time and doing these really nice things, and suddenly everything is closing down. And so I went to a house where my grandparents used to live in the north of Portugal. It's sort of a countryside place. I had chickens and grew cabbages and stuff like that, because you can't paint all the time even though you want to. So I was just painting landscapes, trees and bushes and clouds and that sort of thing. I think it influenced my work now, because landscape became an important thing in my practice. It was quite meditative, because when you're painting a landscape and you're looking at it, you're not really thinking about anything. You're just following the leaves and the shapes and trying to keep them right. Then I shared the studio with some mates. In the beginning, it was really exciting. It was a really important part of my journey as well. After a while, it became a bit monotonous, and I just wanted to get out of Porto as soon as I could. And then I moved to London. I mean, obviously, there's a lot of great museums and art to see, but I think more than that, what really excited me was the fact that there was a lot of young people, a lot of amazing emerging painters sort of pursuing similar things than the ones I was trying to pursue. There's like contemporary conversation rather than only an historical one. It's really enriching, because you'll really learn a lot with that people and seeing their work and taking things, because I feel like a painter is a bit like you're always stealing things from someone else and making them your own. And I'm sure when people go to my studio, they're in some way doing the same. And I think there's something really interesting about that dynamic. My MA at City and Guilds was a really pivotal point. So the course started in September. Until Christmas, I didn't actually paint it. My friends were mocking me because I was like the painter who doesn't paint, because I was just thinking and drawing a lot. The tutors were always asking, like, what's your practice about? What are you looking for in your work? And that sort of terrible questions that you really don't know how to answer them. And when you're asked them, you sort of realize that you actually have no idea. And because you have to think about that over and over again, I think you sort of learn what you really care about. I think the main aim of my practice, since quite the beginning, to delve into the intricacies and the complexities of human relationships. I'm not creating an ideal world. I'm not creating a depiction of a terrible world. I'm just sort of mirroring our own world. It's sort of like Lewis Carroll, like on the other side of the mirror. It's just mirroring things in a more naked way, and I think it's sort of creating a metaphor or an analogy that allows you to portray the things you see every day in the real world, but in a place where rules don't really apply. In my paintings, people tend to be quite lonely or melancholic, sort of distracted from the whole scene, and I think that's a bit of the point, is everyone is together, but everyone is just within a bubble and not really paying attention to whatever is happening. Say in one of my recent paintings, you have a baby on the floor just left there, and people are just going about their lives, and no one is really doing anything about anything. I think family is a really interesting topic, because it's like when you go for Christmas, for example, it's like this family gathering, and so it's like everyone just leaves their problems at the door, and everyone's life is complicated and it's a mess, or it's really happy, but you just put a costume and play your family role. I mean, people are a lot of things at the same time, and it's not necessarily fake. It's as truthful as any of the rest. It's just we play different roles, and that's really interesting, I think. I want my work to be a number of things, but I don't want any of them to sort of overtake control of what the painting is really about. And so I want the painting to be poignant and a bit provocative, but I don't want it to be controversial. I don't want it to be about being problematic or anything. But I also want it to be sweet in a way that we feel comfortable, but not too much. I think sometimes you look at something, and from the first time you're looking at it, you think, this is really sweet, or oh, this looks really nice, or what a lovely family time. And then you look a bit more and you're like, hold on, something is very wrong. It sort of makes you feel guilty for not seeing it from the start. But at the same time, it's not wrong enough to be obviously wrong. And so you need to sort of question your boundaries and your morals and how things may look something entirely different from what they are. I think it's like a really fine line that I'm trying to be on between being overly provocative and being overly banal and just empty. And so in the middle you have the two things come together, and you have the banal things being provocative, and I think that's something I quite enjoy. I get asked a lot, why do you paint people naked or half naked or whatever? I think the answer is because people are naked sometimes, are half naked sometimes, and so it wouldn't make sense not to make it part of the work. At the same time, I know I do it on purpose quite a lot, it's a good way of showing vulnerability, and people get more exposed when they're without clothes, and it becomes really easy to create really strong narratives between, say, if you have two people and one of them is dressed and the other one is not. It's really a different tension that you're creating. And if you change the thing, so if say if you have an older a man and a child, and one of them is naked, means one thing. If it's the other one, it means completely the opposite. Especially because historically, nakedness and nudity are quite an issue. They are depicted over and over again without, just in an aesthetic way. And nowadays we're able to look back at that and see there's a lot of issues there. It's quite an interesting problematic to sort of rethink and think how we can bring it back in a contemporary way that is relevant, that it brings something else to the conversation. So I think humor is quite an important tool in playing with this emotional response, because it allows you to make people a bit confused about what they're looking at, because it is funny and at the same time it's really not. And so I think in the paintings, sometimes the animals is where the real action is happening. One of the cool things about animals is that you have the permission to do sort of whatever you want, because if you have two dogs shagging, that's sort of funny. It's a bit awkward. But if it's people and I'm depicting that, it's just a bit vulgar and overly dramatic, and so you just sort of lose the point. And so it allows you to also establish parallels within the painting, where you have something that the animals are doing and the human are also doing it in a less obvious way. And through looking at one, you can see that that's really what's happening. And it sort of unveils the awkwardness and the ridiculous of some of our actions and some of our connections with other people through showing it in the animal realm. I think it's really fun. The compositions are usually set up in an outdoor setting, in this sort of idyllic backdrops. And I think there's a couple of reasons for that. The landscapes, they allow me to bring the intimacy of what happens usually behind closed doors to the outdoor space, and to sort of expose it for what it is. And it's really weird when you see intimacy in an unintimate context. At the same time, I think by making it more idyllic and making it more naive, sort of cartoon-like even, they become backdrops, and it sort of reinforces the element of collage that I have in my work. And so it's just an amalgamation of things that don't make sense, and it's full of sort of loopholes, and the whole image just comes apart when you really look at it, because nothing makes too much sense, but it makes sense enough that you have to look for it. In my practice, I feel that I am sort of matching two different historical periods, which is, on the one hand, the intimacy of 20th century painting, and at the same time, the landscape-like situation of impressionism and painters like Manet and Degas and Gauguin. And so there's a bit of these two different worlds that come together. One is really idyllic, the other one is really intimate and discomforting. There's a certain fakeness about it. It's like when you go to the theater and you're looking at the scene and everything looks perfect, it makes a lot of sense. But if you have a terrible seat and you're next to the stage, you can actually see all the actors getting out and coming into scene. You can see that the backdrops are just flat cardboard pieces. And I think that's what I'm trying to do in the painting as well. I'm trying to sort of do a bit of behind the scenes of the world. And so when you have, for example, two canvases together to make a larger canvas, I'm intentionally using the gap between them as a place where things just disappear or things appear out of. Characters actually just, because they are flat, some have shadows, some don't. It's like you're watching a play that is poorly produced, and you can actually see everything that's going on, all the engine working behind the scenes without making a lot of sense. Until very recently, until probably this year, painting was something that was like terrifying for me. I was quite afraid of painting. It was like, it's such a serious business. There's a lot of technique involved. There's a lot of, you're trying to prove yourself because you're starting and you're trying to achieve a lot of things. And I think I noticed that I wasn't playing enough with it. I wasn't testing the boundaries of it. And one of the things I really enjoyed about this last body of work is that I realized that I realized that all the influences that I had, from cartoons to music and film and all the things that are also part of my first influences as a child. And so when I'm painting, if I have a crazy idea, if it occurs to me and if it's doable, I just try it out. And if it sucks, it sucks and I take it out. But if it's good, then I just found something else. And I think that playfulness was really something I enjoyed in this last body of work, being able to bring things that are really close to my experience and that shouldn't historically be in painting, but they can, because no one can tell you not to. The way I work is I create a body of work at a time. And so I started by planning out the compositions. The first thing I do is sort of research. I go online and grab as much information, and mostly pictures. It's a lot of a visual research. I grab all the pictures that I feel that can contribute to what I'm seeing in my head. A lot of family photographs, I think it's always because you always have an emotional relationship with them, and so that's interesting to tap into. And then I go outside and do a lot of photographing as well. And then I sort of bring all of this back to the studio. I look at them and make them into drawings. And then I get these sort of puzzle pieces, these small drawings of poses and chairs and animals and trees. And I try to collage them. I change the sizes when I have to. And I literally do a puzzle, like a collage, trying to see how they fit together. And if you put this character next to that one, what does it make you feel? What does it make you think? I try to infer narratives into those compositions, and they just happen, they build up. In my drawings, in the sketches, I do to plan and map out the compositions. I just use black pen and I resort to tracing paper because it allows me to see what I've done underneath, so I can fix things more easily. And then there's a lot of tape. I just tape things together and untape them and tape them again. Once the composition is ready, what I do is I usually scan it and adjust it and project it onto the canvas. So what I do when I project is I just have a very generic outline, and then I go on top of them and correct them directly with the paint. I wanted the painting, the final result, to be as truthful as possible to my practice and to my process. And so one of the ways I've recently found of doing that is incorporating collage itself in the process of making a painting. And so the painting becomes as much preparation as the drawing itself. And so I'm doing a figure, and then if I don't like it, I just take a huge piece of canvas, cut it out and glue it on top. And then because the glue, it takes a bit to dry, if I don't like it, I can just take it off. And that sort of gives me a freedom in creating layers in the canvas itself and making it part of the process. I think oil paint is a really amazing material because it's really super flexible and you can do whatever you want with it. There's a lot of people using it in completely opposite ways. And so that to say, I think the main reason why I use oils is because I just don't have to worry about it. I can stretch it as far as I want. I can do something really flat and do something really textural, and I want my medium to be something that is comfortable so that I can then do things that get me outside of my comfort zone without not having to think like, can I paint this? Can I mix the paint properly? And so I'm not fighting anymore with the technical aspect of it. It's just more like creating the image. At the same time, I think oil is exceptional in the fact that it dialogues with history, with art history, and allows you to sort of partake in that dialogue through employing the same materials. In my palette, because I never scrape it and clean it well, you can actually see where each color is placed, and I just place them all the time in the same spot. I do think color is an amazing thing to play with. It was one of the most difficult things to grasp in my painting process, because in the beginning I used to paint with a lot of browns and sort of darker tones, because drawing and painting is difficult enough, and so color just makes it harder. But as time passed, I started enjoying playing with that. Perhaps my favorite moment when I'm doing a painting is in the end, where the whole painting is basically done. You get to play with color, and you can just sit there, look at it, and choose to do tiny things with color that make the painting more interesting. I used to be quite conservative to the use of bright colors, but now it's the opposite. I just get really excited. And so when I go to buy paints and I see one that is just really ugly, it's like a bright purple or something that there's no way it's going to work in a painting, I just buy it and try making it work in a painting. And then there's green. I use a lot of green in my paintings. Sometimes I wonder if I should, and I think at a certain point I will force myself to stop using as much green as I do now, because I think that's how my practice works. I find what my crutches are, which things I'm relying on too much, and I try to drag them away and see what I can do without. I use Viridian green for the outlines, emerald green and other type of greens for the whole background. I have a stash of colors in my studio, and it's mostly red and green. There's like 20 tubes of red and green because I know they just there's never enough. So I know there's a way in which you're supposed to mix the mediums, the solvent and the oil. To be honest, I just use a lot of linseed oil. It's the one medium I use. Probably a bit too much sometimes. But that makes the paint really flexible, and I can just paint huge surfaces without running out of paint. And other than that, I use tons of solvent, not in the paint itself, not in the painting process, but because I erase a lot of the things I do, and so I need a lot of solvent, and then I clean the brushes with solvent, and then I clean the palette with solvent, and so I think in a year I use like 30 liters of something or more. It's like an addiction. I use a palette knife, not to paint. I don't like painting with palette knives, but to mix paint, because sometimes it's like a large amount of paint. The palette knife helps me mixing a large amount of color that all looks the same. So the brushes that I use are typically the round ones, long hair, and I have mostly large ones. I never have the tiny ones for details, and so when I need them, I actually have to ask someone else usually, because I just don't have them. I use my fingers sometimes, I shouldn't, but it's just all the paintbrushes are dirty and they need to be washed, and I don't feel like washing them, and there's a bit of paint that is too thick or a bit of canvas that is not painted yet, and I just move it a bit around. Sometimes I think when I'm doing it, I'm like, in 100 years, if someone cares about my painting, they'll know it's mine, because it's like has my fingerprint in the paint. In the most recent body of work I'm working on, I use just cotton duck canvas, raw canvas. I clear primed it with clear gesso, and so it also has a background tone, even though it's not a colorful one, or it's not even a dark one. It's just a medium tone to start with, so I don't have to paint all the bits of the canvas. I can just leave bits unpainted. The way I work now, it's almost methodically. I start with the figures because it's the hardest part, and so I just want to get it out the way. I feel like when you're starting a painting, there's a huge amount of possibilities, and for each brushstroke, you cut the possibilities down. And so when I have all the figures painted, all the elements painted, the background can't really be anything. It needs to be something that suits the rest of it. Sometimes it makes it tricky to find the right one, but at the same time, because there's constraints, it sort of closes down my options. I think scale came into my work as a way to prove myself. So in college, I started painting big because I like big paintings, but also because it was a way of showing that I could paint big. It was sort of a statement. But then I realized that I didn't really care about making that statement. But I think it's a bit like watching a film at home or going to the cinema to watch it. And by making it bigger, the commitment is bigger. And you're sort of telling people that no matter what exactly you're painting, you took a lot of time doing it, and there's a lot of planning, and there's a lot of painting, and they should look at it, and they should take it seriously, without which also plays with the fact that then I'm not being serious at all. At the same time, the scale allows me to create sort of a backdrop, a scenario, where the scene happens, and the viewer, because it's almost the same scale as the figures, becomes part of it. So you become sort of a voyeur in the scene instead of just someone looking at a painting. I very rarely abandon a painting, and so when something happens that I don't really like, I just either erase it completely with solvent, or I just take a cut out and put something on top. I think a lot of the decision making is also intuitive. There's not a particular reason for everything, even though the composition comes for a reason. A lot of the process along the way, just things happen for technical reasons or for intuitive reasons, and that builds the painting without you necessarily trying to do it with a specific purpose. I think I wasn't on the computer just experimenting things on Photoshop. What if I put something here, or if I paint this over? And I don't know exactly how it happens. I don't know if it was an accident or if it was just because I was sort of cropping a figure, and I ended up put paint on it, and I had like a silhouette, and I'm like, this is really cool. And so I changed it to black, and I experimented with blacking out all the figures in the painting, and then playing with which ones should be blacked out. The next day I went to the studio to black out the figures and make them into silhouettes. I was like sweating. I was so, because the painting was, I mean, it wasn't solved, but it was going somewhere. And if that didn't work, I was going to ruin the whole painting. And it was a huge painting, and I had spent a lot of time on it. And so it begs the question, why are you blacking them out if instead of taking them? Because you're not removing them, you're just casting a shadow on them. And I think it allows for other interpretations and readings. So sometimes I'm looking at the painting and I have no idea what to do about it. And so I do use a few distancing tools to try to look at it from a different perspective. I used to resort to mirrors quite a lot. When I had one in my studio, I sit with my head down on my chair and just lay on the floor and look at it up, because everything becomes like fit up, and it allows you to see the painting in a different perspective. I used to do a lot of pictures with my phone, but I realized that then I would take them home and sort of obsess over them and see problems that didn't really exist. So now I try not to do it. When it's not working, just go home. It's I think painters, and myself amongst them, we tend to be quite dramatic about our work because it is our work. And so sometimes I find myself doing mistakes and sort of going over and over again something that doesn't need that. And for me, I think from the first brushstroke, I'm trying to stop. And so I usually think that the less you do, the better the painting is. And so there's not really a point in overworking a painting. You're just doing enough. So at every point, I'm taking a step back and thinking, could I just stop? I never knew what to call the works. It's just you have it all done, and the title is not adding anything, but you need to give it one. Throughout time, I think I realized that I could use the titling to do something else and to sort of establish a mood, an intention for the viewer to sort of have a shortcut to understanding my universe and what I'm trying to do. And so, for example, one of the paintings that from this body of work, it's called Who Killed Bambi. It's the name of a song by the Sex Pistols. It's about innocence and the death of innocence, and about how when you come of age, the world changes, and that had a lot to do with my practice. Even though I don't see my work as punk at all, I think that's a bit what I'm trying to do, is being satirical about naivety and presenting things that are sort of pathetic or childlike in some way, but doing it in such seriousness that you're left floating in there trying to grasp. Every time you find something, it becomes like your own style. You could indeed just do 10 more and 10 more, and you'd have a lot of work and you'd show a lot of work. And I think the main reason why I just can't do it is it bores me to death. I hate doing things that I know exactly how they're going to turn out. And when people ask me how long did it take, the painting time was actually like 3-4 days, maybe like 2 weeks maximum. But the other 2 weeks or the other 2 months was just like staring, a lot of thinking and trying to think what I want about that painting. And because I think it's about doing what I really want. And I think if my objective was to sell a lot of paintings and show a lot of paintings with the end goal of being really successful or making a lot of money, then this is absolutely not the right area to be in. And I think in the end of the day, the reason why I like painting is because it's challenging and because I want to do something that echoes in other people's lives, and sort of what I feel about Polyrego and Freud and Hockney and all these people who I feel, even though I don't know them, and you feel like you do, and you feel like the work is yours as well. And I think that's what I'm trying to achieve, what I'm trying to do. And in that, like, repetition and just keep doing whatever you do just doesn't accomplish much. It doesn't really fulfill anything, so it becomes just pointless. I always try to get to the studio at the same time, like if it's a 9 to 5 job, which is sort of funny because I say a lot of times that I came to painting because I don't want to have a 9 to 5 job, but I sort of do. I'm quite an organized painter, which is sometimes not very common. I mean, I make a mess while I'm working, but then in the end of the day, I clean everything and put everything really neat and back to place. I'm working at one painting, sometimes more at the time, depends on the sizes, and it's just the painting, the table, and myself, and there's not a lot more going on. For me, painting is, I mean, it's always about technique and about drawing and about a lot of things, but I think in the end of the day, it's about persistence, it's about sticking to what you believe and just not quitting. And I think a lot of times it doesn't really matter because you have people that are just terrible at drawing, and sometimes people that don't even have education, formal education, and they turn out to be amazing painters. So I think it's about committing and just working. I do think that's the most important thing, is just going to the studio every single day and keep working and working. And I think if you really believe it, I think things just become something.